Okay, I am talking for a little while about ministry and mission in a media world. There have been extraordinary shifts in the last half century, but not just in the Western world, but globally. And one of the central factors, in fact, I think I would argue quite strongly, the central factor in all of that is the changing nature of media. Back in 1967, the great media commentator Marshall McLuhan said that time has ceased, space has vanished. We now live in a global village. It's a very famous statement. Bill Gates picked it up in a major speech he gave where he said the internet is the global, the town square, the global village of today. But McLuhan was saying that back in the early days of television as a really mass medium. Well, I mean, not early days, it was established, but 30 years before the World Wide Web was invented by Tim Berners-Lee. You just think of the extraordinary change that we have experienced, even in the last 20 odd years. Here we all are, right across the world. I was looking through what a wide distribution of places we have on our network just yesterday. We have a very good balance from all over the place. More Norwegians than anybody else, but there are not that many of them. And that's fantastic. We can do this because of the way that media has become so part of life. Can you imagine what a pandemic like this would have been like even 10 years ago, never mind 20 years ago? We just couldn't have done this kind of thing. But it does mean that the media constantly present themselves to us, that we are surrounded by media technologies, we are in contact with many media channels, and we hear countless media messages. And so Kelton Cobb says that we are presented with a parade of alternative worlds. And thanks to always-on technology, that parade of alternative worlds has constant access into our homes, into our families, and of course, into our minds as well. So we need to think how media changes society. This is a move, this domination of media is called mediatization. So how exactly does media change society? Schultz, in a very significant paper about mediatization as an analytical concept, he talks about 4 ways in which the media have transformed society. Firstly, media extend our communication capabilities, and our presence with each other while physically separate this afternoon is graphic testament to how it helps us to overcome our spatial separation and our temporal separation as well. I couldn't watch Peter today, but I'll watch Peter tonight. So there'll still be some kind of connection, though there is still a little temporal separation when singing happy birthday together. But nevertheless, it overcomes all sorts of separations because it extends our capabilities. Secondly, media substitute for social activities and institutions. So not necessarily completely, but some of the things that have used to happen offline now happen online. They happen in a media sphere rather than in a physical space. I can't imagine that European Leadership Forum will remain as an online event, though I hope they continue to have some online aspects to it. But at least during lockdown, media has completely substituted for church and home groups and ELF and all kinds of other things, for friendship meetups, for dinners with friends. So that changes their character. It's great to be together, but we're not together. It's not the same as being in the corridors in Poland, unable to hear what anybody else is saying because there's so much noise. So there's a lot of substitution. Thirdly, media activities merge with other media activities and also with non-media activities. So there is no clear distinction between one part of life and another part of life anymore. We go to church, and I always use my Bible on my phone rather than a paper Bible because I want to have other translations open in front of me particularly if we're in the Old Testament. And so I'm not going online, but I'm still depending on the media on my phone rather than on the old-fashioned paper medium. So there's a blurring of boundaries there at a very simple level, but it happens in all sorts of aspects of life, that there's no clear distinctions, and there's a leakage, seepage from one into another. And then the fourth aspect is that media demands to be accommodated within everything else. The institutions within society now cannot ignore media in the way that they function, in their economics, and of course, especially in their communication. So just before lockdown, I was doing some writing in the coffee shop on Southampton University campus, and there were a group of students there, all with their phones out. They were talking to each other. They were taking photographs. There were bits of video probably going on. They were showing each other things on their Instagram feeds. But there were one or two of them on tablets or laptops, I can't remember now. And they may well have been working at the same time, submitting assignments at the last minute or whatever. Some of them may have been checking in with their sports groups. It's possible, for all I know, that some of them were connecting with their church. Who knows? But I thought, here is such a blurring of boundaries. This is exactly what Schultz is talking about, because their encounter with each other in a coffee shop that would have just been a face-to-face conversation once upon a time now included people in all sorts of other places, possibly even outside of the UK. And there was that sharing of media from them to others, from others to them, among each other, and a blurring of boundaries probably over the different spheres of life that they were involved in at that moment. So Stig Kjærvad, who's a Danish professor, he says that mediatization has two key developments to it. Firstly, the media is a largely autonomous, independent force within society. It's an institution on its own right, but it is an integral aspect of the functioning of everything else: family, church, state, education, absolutely everything. A couple of years ago, a survey was done in the UK of 16 to 24-year-olds of how they spent their time, and particularly their media access. And the survey showed that over 13 hours a day was spent by this age bracket engaging with some kind of media content. But a third of that time, interestingly, is because they are communicating, not because it's passive absorption of media, but because they're communicating, presumably about all of the other facets of life. Now, my guess is that they ended up having to have some fairly sharp distinctions. It's a while since I read the report now, but I can imagine that people eating and reading their books are also engaged with media to some extent at that point. So I suspect the reality may even be more than 13 hours a day, but 13 hours of exclusively media access a day. But interesting, what a big proportion of that was communication, because it is something that pervades all of life. But it presents us with some very significant challenges. Firstly, because people rely on media, people within society as a whole rely on the media increasingly for information about everything. And therefore that includes religious issues. So Jenny Taylor, who some of us will know, I can't remember whether she's been to the forum, but she's certainly involved in the Lausanne Media Engagement Network. She talks about religious illiteracy in particularly in the UK context, but more widely, and she says it's widespread and it's toxic. So as a result of that, the information that people are getting is half-baked. Very often it's inaccurate, it's distorted, and the battery on my headphones has just gone, so I'm going to take those off because I'm not listening to you anyway. Oh, that's much more comfortable. They get so hot on my ears. Now I feel much better. So they're relying on media for information, but a lot of that information is misleading, inaccurate, or whatever. The way that we communicate about faith, whether the Christians communicating about faith, but how religion generally is communicated, is shaped by the demands of popular media. So it has to conform to the the sound bites of contemporary news and current affairs media, or it has to conform to the narratives within more dramatic narrative media. And so that shapes, again, it shapes the way that media gets that faith and religious elements get communicated. And of course, the media itself has begun to substitute, going back to the second of Schultz's points, it's begun to substitute for some of the cultural and social functions of institutional religion, of the church. It provides spiritual guidance for people. It provides moral orientation for people. It gives people some sense of rites of passage sometimes. It gives people a sense of community and belonging, all things that people would have once upon a time looked to the church for. So there's a huge challenge there. Firstly, there's a challenge to discipleship. David Kinnaman from Barna says that screens disciple young people. So we need to take that very seriously. But secondly, there's a challenge to mission. And I want to say a little bit about both of those in the time that we have. Firstly, discipleship in a mediatized culture. How do we deal with that challenge of mediatization for our discipleship? One of the things I've really valued from David Kinnaman in recent years is, it's a trilogy of studies and books that have come out of it now, but the key one, I think, is Faith for Exiles by David Kinnaman and Mark Matlock. And in that, they talk about 5 marks that have come out of their 5 practices that they found in their research into, I think it was millennials primarily, maybe millennials and Generation Z. I need to check again now. But 5 practices of resilient disciples among basically younger people. And these are their 5 practices: experiencing Jesus, cultural discernment, meaningful relationships, vocational discipleship, and countercultural mission. And the second of those, of course, is extremely relevant to us: cultural discernment. How do we understand the culture in which we live? When the culture in which we live is completely media saturated, it is a mediatized culture. So cultural discernment has to take very seriously the media reality in which we live. And so media awareness is a very key aspect of that. Now, you'll remember that we talk about these 3 aspects of media engagement within our network here and within Lausanne: media awareness, media practice, presence, and media ministries. But let me just say this, that we need to think in 3 different planes. Firstly, we need to think about the world behind the text. That is, where does this media message, this media product come from? This film, this television program, this book, this news item, what's going on behind it? What's the context in which it fits? Both in terms of the institutions that shape it, the cultural forces that drive it, the people who are responsible for creating it, the sociological forces that are at play that it may be responding to. What's the bigger context, the world behind the text? This is from Paul Ricoeur, of course. Then the second plane, as I've shown it on my slide, is the world of the text. What is actually going on within the media itself? How do we understand the media messages that are being communicated, both at a worldview level, but also thinking about the aesthetics and the emotional side of it, and how do we respond to that? What's going on with the media products themselves? But then we need to think about the world in front of the text, and that is the audiences of this media product, the film or the book or the television program, the piece of music. And that is us. How do we respond to it? What is it doing to us? What are the people that we're trying to disciple, or the people that we're trying to minister to, or the people that we're trying to reach? What is it doing to all of them? And so in terms of discipleship in a mediatized context, we need to move through those 3 planes, understanding where this media thing has come from, understanding the media thing in itself, and then understanding what it does to us as human beings. And we need to do that for ourselves as well as for anybody else that we are trying to work with or minister to. Today being my birthday, I was given a very wonderful birthday present, which is a book called Every Moment Holy by Douglas McKelvey, published by Rabbit Room Press. And it's a whole collection of liturgies for all sorts of different bits of life. There's a wonderful one that we printed off from the Rabbit Room website some time ago, a liturgy for feasting with friends that we read sometimes. But I discovered there's a liturgy in there before consuming media. So I'm going to read this. O discerning spirit, who alone judges all things rightly, now be present in my mind and active in my imagination as I prepare to engage with the claims and questions of diverse cultures incarnated in the stories that people tell. Let me experience mediums of art and expression, neither as a passive consumer nor as an entertainment glutton, but rather as one who through such works would more fully and compassionately enter this ongoing human conversation of mystery and meaning, wonder and beauty, good and evil, sorrow and joy, fear and love. Is that splendid? I'm going to use this again and again and again in my own discipleship with media. Second aspect is media ministries. Remember, we're still talking about discipleship in the mediatized context. So how can we use media to disciple people? The majority of people in this network actually are from a media ministry background. There are very few of us who are from a primarily media awareness background. There are a few who are from a media presence background. There's a few who overlap, but most of you are from a media ministries background at some level or other. So many of you are already thinking quite hard about how to disciple people through media. But all of us, every church, every Christian leader is learning a lot about that in these lockdown days. How do we do church online? How do we make small groups happen? How can we use the media in order to help people to continue to grow as Christians? So there's been a lot of very good thinking going on. But as we come out of some of the restrictions that we're under and we begin to move into a new normality, we are going to have to do some really careful theological reflection on what we've been doing, as well as pragmatic evaluation. We need to think through what are we doing and how are we doing it and why are we doing it and what are the theological implications of that, so that we don't just do things because they work in the long term, but do we do things because they actually generate growth in people's lives? So I think there's some important issues to think through for the future. And then thirdly, media presence, which relates to point 4 of those 5 points, the vocational discipleship thing, because those people, Christians who are in a mainstream media world, they are living out their vocation in that context. So how do we disciple them in particular as Christians in that context? I'd love to say more about that. We don't have time. So then thinking about mission in a mediatized context, and again, all 3 aspects of media engagement play into this. The media awareness, I won't say anything more about that because we've covered that already. Secondly, the media ministries. Again, some of you in media ministries are using media primarily to reach people rather than to disciple people. But again, what I was saying just now about the theological as well as pragmatic evaluation of what we do, that's not just true for discipleship through media ministry. It's true for outreach through media ministry, but it's true of media awareness. It's true of media presence. We need to be reflecting theologically on what we do, not just at a pragmatic level. And one of my concerns about the church in the West, at least, very often is that a lot of our thinking is pragmatically driven rather than being really theologically rooted. But I think just in terms of media ministries in relation to mission, whether that be global mission or mission in a much more local context, it relates to the 5th of Kinnaman's points, which is countercultural mission. Because anything that we do as Christians has to be countercultural. That's what we are called to do. We are to be in the world, but not of the world. And there is a very fine balance to be found, isn't there, between, on the one hand, identifying enough with the culture that we live in order to be able to communicate meaningfully into it. But on the other hand, maintaining our distinctiveness from it. That is our constant dilemma in engaging with mainstream media. How do we maintain our distinctiveness but identify with it? So it's a challenge for all of these areas, whether you're in a media presence context, an awareness context, or a ministry context. So we've got to figure out what that balance is. We do not want to be like Demas in 2 Timothy 4, when Paul says, Demas has deserted me for he loved this world. It's the verb agapao, the same verb as is used in John 3:16, that we often think means self-sacrificing love. But Demas was not self-sacrificingly loving the world in order to abandon Paul. He loved the world too much. He wanted to be in it, like Cypher in The Matrix. So how can we do media ministry in a really countercultural way that connects with people, that grabs people, and yet shows them something radically different? Many of you are thinking that through already. And then finally, media presence. This again relates to point 4 of those 5 points, vocational discipleship. This is my friend, Francis Annan, who is his film directorial debut was earlier this year with Escape from Pretoria, which I mentioned in my workshop on Monday afternoon. But most of you weren't there, so you won't know that I mentioned it there. So here he is with Daniel Radcliffe and Daniel Webber. I think Escape from Pretoria is a cracking film. It is literally an edge of the seat thriller. The tension does not let up from beginning to end. All 5 of my family, we were sitting on the edges of our seats with sweaty palms watching this film. But Francis, I've known him for years, since he was the Christian Union, president of the Christian Union in a university near here, studying film studies. And he got me in to lead a film discussion, one of the first ones I'd done. And he got all of his friends, the entire film studies course, to come along into the lecture theatre for the screening of whatever it was we showed. We had the most brilliant discussion. But now, you know, he has had this career of media presence right in the BBC and in the film world, working with now the likes of Radcliffe in order to make stories. And there's a great video of him being interviewed for his church, St Helens Bishopsgate in London, which you can find on their website, that was recorded or was broadcast just this last Sunday. So we need that kind of media presence role. And people like Francis are in the media and are able to give alternative voices. They're living out that countercultural mission by being distinctively Christian within the mainstream world. It is so important to have Christian voices within the mainstream media. Like Sheridan, who's with us in our network this week. It's great to have Sheridan with us. Sheridan does pause for thought, thought for the day kind of ideas, just brief little nuggets on BBC Radio 2, one of our national radio channels. And he's just got, I don't know, 3-4 minutes, something like that. A little bit of interaction with the presenter, and then he's able to do his little bit. And he just has a gift of being able to draw people in. And you can't say very much in that time on national radio, but he can just say enough to begin to bring people in. So we need these kind of alternative voices. And that may be not the situation we're in, but we have to pray for them and figure out how do we find more people in that context to be in those kinds of situations. So in terms of our 5 aspects of resilient disciples, we need to be thinking through all of those in relation to media. We need to be thinking through all of the implications of those for our mission within a mediatized world. There's so many implications of this. All I've done this afternoon is say, here are 2 massive challenges. And I haven't really given any answers, but that all of us need to think that through for ourselves in our own contexts. So 3 questions for you to think about. Within your own fields, how do you see media extending, substituting, merging, demanding to be accommodated? Those 4 points from Schultz. Don't spend too long on that, just any significant observations you might have. Secondly, how do you see cultural discernment working out in your particular context, whether it be discipleship or mission? And then what part, whether positive or negative, might media play in relation to the other 4 of those aspects of resilient discipleship?